People will show up when they show up, I guess. Last time we were talking about PCP. PCP is really kind of interesting. It was invented so that we could use it as an anesthetic. That's not right. Yeah, as an anesthetic. It was found to have toxic side effects, and for that reason they decided to only use it on animals, since the animals couldn't complain about the side effects. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has hallucinogenic side effects, and that's kind of a problem, especially for humans. It's also known as angel dust. If you watch television, then you probably have seen called angel dust. Peeps, it's called KJ, Sherman's, and ozone. It can be sprinkled on marijuana and smoked in a joint, and of course that is part of the problem with smoking marijuana in places where they do have PCP. Sometimes they do this and don't tell people about it. It can be smoked and snorted, swallowed, or injected. You can take it in just about any way that you want. You can get it into your system in just about any way you want. It seems to disconnect sensory messages sent into the central nervous system. It takes away your inhibitions. I mean, all your inhibitions. There was a case of an individual in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he had smoked some PCP, and the guy ripped off all of his clothes and was running around town punching out windows, punching out car windows with his fist. When they finally caught him, of course it took them, they had to chase the guy down. He was running as fast as he could, and he's just punching out windows every time he comes up to one. Well, by the time, the only reason they caught him is because he almost bled to death. He cut his hand up so bad. They were thinking they were going to have to amputate his hand. They didn't. They were able to fix it, but it's scarred and it's barely functional now. And of course that was the problem. They had to, he started to collapse. He was fighting the police all the way to the hospital. And of course the guy's also completely naked because he's torn off all of his clothes. He had come across a woman who was jogging from the other direction. She didn't really, she said that she thought that he was wearing Speedos. And he wasn't wearing Speedos, evidently. Well, we won't go into that. But he grabbed her and he started punching her in the head, not in the face. He's punching her on her skull, knocked her out, put her over his shoulder, and was running down the street with her as he was losing blood. Of course, as he grabbed her with his right hand. He was right-handed, and that's what he was punching the windows with. As he just covered her with blood, and of course, everybody thought that she was near death because she had all this blood all over her. And he did punch her in the head. She had knots on her head, but it didn't break her scalp. So eventually he put her down, and the reason he put her down was because he was getting weaker. Anyway, lots of really strange stuff. As far as he was concerned, he was turning his hand into hamburger, but he didn't feel it because it deadens pain. It gives you a strange feeling of mind-body separation. The individual tends not to remember what they did, as interesting as that may be. The individual has difficulty concentrating. They tend to be violent. They tend to be very aggressive, and of course this guy was. And they don't think of themselves as themselves. They see themselves as somebody else. So there's a depersonalization that takes place. 40% report hallucinations, both tactile, visual, and auditory, Sign everybody in here. Okay. Anyway, damage can be done by the individual to themselves by overstressing their muscles, sinews, and flesh. And in this case, he actually tore a muscle away from his elbow, one of his forearm muscles. He tore it away from his elbow. It didn't slow him down or even stop him. Low doses of PCP produce mild depression and then stimulation and last for about 1 to 2 hours. So if you only take a little bit, it's only going to last for an hour or two. Moderate doses of PCP produce an intense sensory deprived state and last for 4 to 6 hours. And of course, this is what people are looking for. They're looking for some degree of stimulation. They're really not looking to have anterograde and retrograde amnesia. What they're looking for a relatively moderate or a low dose state. Heavy doses of PCP produce catatonia, coma, convulsions, and kidney failure, and can last for up to 48 hours. So they're really not looking for the moderate dosage or even the heavy dosage. It's certainly not the heavy dosage, which can kill you, but they're looking for the low dosage. And of course, how much PCP does it take to be a low dose or a moderate dose? And that's the question: is this pure stuff, or has it been cut with something? That's the other question that you have to ask yourself as you're sprinkling this on your marijuana. The general drug-using population does not routinely use PCP because of the high frequency of bad trips, the violence, the aggression, the fact that you do things that you're not aware of. The individual suffers from anterograde and retrograde amnesia, so they can't remember this. They black out during the entire episode. And this is one of the reasons why the police have such a difficult time. If there's PCP on the streets and they know it's on the streets, then if they confront somebody, if they confront Johnny and Johnny doesn't back down, what's going to happen next? Well, you could pump several rounds into Johnny, and it's not going to stop. You can cut his right arm off, and he's going to try to beat you to death with his left arm. Or if he can get a hold of his right arm, he'll beat you to death with his right arm, his left arm. If he's on PCP, but of course if he's not, and if you knock him out with the first punch, when he's blacked out and he's still moving, you may think he's on PCP, and that's one of the problems. That's one of the reasons why the police are in such a difficult situation, because if somebody's really on PCP, if there's PCP on the streets and they know it's out there because they've seen it, then they don't know what to do next. Do they beat Johnny until he's a bloody pulp and he can't move anymore? And the answer is probably potentially yes, especially if it's out there. Sorry, I know you would never do anything like that, Johnny. Although I didn't want to use Edison because I know he would. That's why I used you as an example. Salvia Divinorum is a member of the mint family and produces psychedelic effects when ingested. It creates dreamlike hallucinations, occasional delirium, and out-of-body sensations. When smoked, the effects only last for about 1 to 7 minutes. The key ingredient is salvorin. At present, the drug is legal, but under review for scheduling. So Salvia Divinorum is a hallucinogen that is out there. That's not illegal at this point. Amanita mushrooms have been used for rituals as far back as Neanderthal man. The mushroom causes dreamy intoxication, hallucinations, delirious excitement, physical toxic effects that can be deadly. The effects start 30 minutes after ingestion and they last for 4 to 8 hours. Active ingredients resemble the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA. Too much of the mushroom will make the user sick, as if they have food poisoning, so they vomit profusely. Dextromethorphan. If you use any cough syrup, then potentially it has dextromethorphan in it, especially if it's Robitussin DM, Coricidin, or Romalar. 10 to 15 times the recommended dose can give the user. What is the recommended dose for cough syrup? Two tablespoons? About 2 tablespoons? So how many tablespoons do you think is in a bottle? 20, 25? Probably? Okay. Cool people in Los Angeles back in the 90s and early 2000s. They were using this stuff at clubs in Los Angeles, and they were drinking 1 or 2 bottles of this stuff. Yeah, I know. That's a lot more than... Anyway. So what was it doing to these people? It was giving them a state of euphoria, mind-body separation, auditory and visual hallucinations. So the music was was a lot more intense for these individuals than it was for other individuals. Loss of coordination, dilated pupils, decreased orgasm, which seems like something that's counterintuitive. Usually you take these drugs in order to get lucky. These individuals, of course, aren't very likely to get lucky. Nausea and upset stomach, itching, rashes, fever, tachycardia, acute anxiety, and panic reactions are all things that happen to you. So, do people really do this? Do they really take nutmeg? Do they really put a bunch of it in their mouth and get a buzz from it? The answer is yes. Mace, the stuff that you spray on people in the eyes and then they can't function anymore. Mace is made from the same tree that nutmeg is, as interesting as that is. In heavy doses, they can cause mild floating sensations to full-blown delirium. Such heavy doses do have their price. Nutmeg tends to, not mace, of course. Mace is, well, you can buy it, but I don't know if you would use it for this reason. You get a bad hangover and a severely upset stomach, so it makes you vomit, which is always a lot of fun. This combination is rarely used outside of prisons, where the other psychedelics are unavailable to these individuals. So yeah, nutmeg is one of the things that they control. So what do you use? What do you cook with nutmeg? Is it pumpkin pie? You put nutmeg in pumpkin pie? It's something that you sprinkle on eggnog, I guess. Nutmeg. Anyway, marijuana. Marijuana, you can call it marijuana, cannabis, or hemp. It is derived from the hemp plant. It produces very, very powerfully strong fibers for rope. The seeds are edible. You can eat the seeds. You can make oil and use it as a fuel or a lubricant from the seeds. There are medicinal values to marijuana, to hemp. It is illegal in almost all countries around the world. Cannabis is a plant that was developed in China and spread throughout the world for its medicinal properties and its powerful fibers, mostly for its powerful fibers. Its medicinal properties are minimal as far as its medicinal power is concerned. Cannabis appears in writings from ancient China and India, so it's been around for an extended length of time. In India, it appears in the Vedas as a divine nectar. That's the oil from the seeds. Cannabis in the form of hemp was brought to the United States before the Revolution to grow for the ships of the Royal Navy. They got real excited about the fact that we had all this open area. They cut down the trees, moved them out of the way, and of course now we can grow hemp there. And the Royal Navy, of course, was real excited. They wanted to buy property in the colonies, but of course the royal government wouldn't allow them to do that. George Washington worked to expand his holdings to grow more and more hemp for profit. If you know where Mount Vernon is up near Washington, where Washington, D.C. is. He was trying to buy property that was on the Virginia-North Carolina border. It was called the Dismal Swamp. And the reason it was called the Dismal Swamp was because it was a low-lying area. Well, he thought he could drain that area and turn that into one huge hemp field. That was what he wanted to do. It was an abysmal failure. And of course, then he decided that he would join our side during the Revolutionary War, and all the rest of it is history. Hemp wasn't used for its psychoactive effects until after World War I, when migrant workers from Mexico introduced smoking the wacky weed to other poor immigrant minority groups. So it was a minority drug between the wars, between World War I and World War II. The psychoactive properties of marijuana became popular during Prohibition, when the still legal pot was smoked for its psychoactive effects by those who sought a new high. And of course, it was different from alcohol, and you didn't have the same after effects that you'd had from alcohol. So it became relatively popular during Prohibition, during the 1930s, late 1920s and early 1930s. 1937, marijuana was declared illegal. Hemp was legally grown during World War II, and the government even experimented with cannabis extracts to produce a truth drug to get to enemy spies or whatever, so that we could get information from them. Doesn't work, it just put them to sleep. So we didn't use it. Hemp is legally grown in France, Italy, the Yugoslavian countries, England and Canada to make paper, textiles, and rope. These are the only countries around the world where it is actually legal to grow marijuana. Now, of course, it's legal to grow marijuana in select places in the United States. Marijuana is legally used in the Netherlands in coffee shops. 160 million people worldwide use some form of marijuana. Normally, you don't find marijuana in Europe. What you find is hashish. That's the tar from the marijuana. They make it into a paste, and it has the same properties as marijuana. Going into the 1960s, only 2% of the people in the United States had tried an illegal drug. So if we look back in the 1940s, late 1940s and early 1950s, a lot of people smoked cigarettes, a lot of people were drinking beer, but they weren't using anything. There was just nothing out on the streets. So the reality is, this is the world that I grew up in. There were hardly any people that I knew that were doing anything. They weren't taking speed, they weren't shooting up with heroin, they weren't smoking marijuana, they weren't doing anything. So the reality is that I grew up in an era when there wasn't, doing illegal things was relatively rare. But then again, I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s, and all of a sudden everything exploded. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And this is one of the things you have to understand. So if you look back in the 1940s or the 1950s, people just weren't breaking the law. It just wasn't something that was happening. So when people get nostalgic and they start looking back toward a simpler time, one of the simpler things that they were looking at was the fact that there weren't a lot of people out there doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing. I was living in Indiana at the time, and one of the things that was illegal in Indiana were fireworks. So we had individuals that were caught with fireworks. As you can imagine, they had a firecracker in the trunk of their car, and they were being arrested and put in prison for having fireworks, as strange as that may sound. Now fireworks are illegal just about everywhere, and it sounds silly to even talk about fireworks as being illegal. But then the counterculture movement started in the United States. It started in the 1960s. It started with the civil rights movement. It started with the peace movement during the Vietnam War. So we had this counterculture movement, and these individuals were talking against the government, and so they started doing illegal things. So they started taking drugs, they started smoking marijuana, they started doing these things in order to thumb their nose at the United States government. By 1979, 68 million Americans had tried marijuana by 1979, and 23 million used it on a monthly basis. So when we talk about using marijuana, this was the heyday of pot. Back in the 1970s, back through the 1970s. This is what happened in the 1970s. Jimmy Carter was elected president in 1976. What happened next? Reagan was elected in 1980. So this is 1979. This is the year before Reagan was elected president. This is when Jimmy Carter was still the president. 68 million Americans had tried marijuana, and 23 million Americans were using it on a daily basis. Well, what was the population of the United States in the 1970s? It was about 250 million people. So about 10% of the population were using it on a regular basis. And this was the heyday of marijuana usage. Now you may wonder what I was doing in 1979. In 1979, I was over in Germany. So most of that time, I wasn't even in the United States. From 1973 until 1979, I was in Lubbock, Texas, up on the Llano Estacado. And of course, I had short hair. Of course, I was in the military, so we had short hair. And the hairstyles at this time for males was relatively long hair. So we were stigmatized by our short hair, as strange as that may sound. Attempted control of the substance waxed and waned over the years, but a resurgence of marijuana prohibition in the 1990s led to a marked drop in its usage. So in the 1990s, so it kind of goes like, like everything else. Sometimes it's popular and sometimes it's unpopular. In the 1990s, it became popular at the end of the 1980s, and then in the 1990s, they started cracking down on it. By 1992, just over 7 million people reported using marijuana on a monthly basis, as compared to 23 million in 1979. By 2006, the number of monthly marijuana users doubled. In 2005, 3,200,000 people used marijuana on a daily basis, and that's in 2005. Okay, so this has waxed and waned. So if you think of the 1960s and 1970s as being fueled by marijuana, then you're pretty much correct. The individuals going to Vietnam, of course, there was marijuana in Vietnam. Most of it was Thai sticks. Thai sticks are marijuana mixed with heroin, as ugly as that sounds. And of course, you couldn't use Thai sticks and go out and fight in a battle, because Thai sticks will put you to sleep. That's heroin. It kind of knocks you out, and so does marijuana. It makes you not very aggressive. So you certainly couldn't fight with after using a Thai stick. Every year, 80,000 emergency room visits occur because of marijuana usage. You think the marijuana, it can't kill you, certainly can't kill you. You can't overdose in marijuana, but the reality is it makes you hallucinate, and it gives you, it slows your heart down. Sometimes it speeds your heart up, and of course people think that there's something wrong with that. So there's about 80,000 emergency room visits per year because of marijuana. 44% of the male adult arrestees test positive for marijuana. People argue that marijuana makes people not aggressive, so it makes it less likely that they'll do something bad. Yet, 44% of the male adult arrestees test positive for marijuana. 32% of the female adult arrestees test positive for marijuana. The reality is, if you mix marijuana with just about anything, you get a different reaction than what people normally talk about. If you drink alcohol and smoke marijuana, sometimes you get aggressive. Alcohol makes you aggressive, but sometimes it knocks you out, puts you to sleep. No, it doesn't put you to sleep, so it kills you. It makes you fall asleep. How's that? 57% of the juvenile male arrestees test positive for marijuana. 32% of juvenile female arrestees test positive for marijuana. So we're arresting people who are stoned. Are they arresting them because they're stoned? No, they're doing something wrong. So marijuana takes away your inhibitions just like alcohol does. The plant grown to make fiber is low in psychoactive substances and is referred to as hemp. I have hemp growing in my fence row in Iowa. It stinks, smells bad, has a very nasty odor. But of course, if I decided to go wacky and start smoking my hemp, it would probably have very little effect. It's called ditchweed, grows all over the Midwest, grows all over Nebraska and Iowa. And of course, it's treated it like weed, and they try to kill it because it's very encroaching and it smells bad. Doesn't chase any insects away, which unfortunately, it actually attracts insects. The plants grown to produce psychoactive resins are referred to as marijuana, and these have very poor fibrous substances, so you really can't mix the two. If you're going to grow it for clothes, if you're going to grow it for paper or textiles of one kind, you need hemp plant. If you grow, the other stuff just doesn't work. At the same time, you can't smoke the hemp plant. It's not going to give you any buzz at all. It's only the female plants that, the female plants have more resin in them than the male plants. Lots of really interesting names, street names for marijuana. Pot, of course. Another name is Muggles. They call it 420, and I don't really understand why. But what is that? April 20th is like the day to smoke pot because of 420. And I don't know, I'm not exactly sure what 420 is. Mary Jane is another name. Griffa, Bud, Herb, Chronic, Dank. African Black is actually a type of marijuana. Panama Red is a type of marijuana. Acapulco Gold is a type of marijuana. In the past we used to call it grass. Leaf, ganja is the name of, is what they call it down in Jamaica. It's actually a religious plant it's smoked religiously down in Jamaica, down in the Caribbean, by the Rastafarians. Anyway, and they call it ganja. Charas, scents, weed, of course, is another dope. Dubage, you may have heard this term used in movies. Dekind, Maui Wowie is actually a type of marijuana grown in Hawaii. Humboldt Green is grown in Humboldt County, California. That's where Humboldt Green comes from. BC Bud is another type, and I'm not sure where that comes from. Buddha Thai, of course, is the type of marijuana coming out of Thailand. Is a type of marijuana coming out of Thailand. Marijuana comes in 3 distinct species, but hundreds of hybrids. Cannabis Sativa is the most common species. It's grown in tropical, subtropical, and temperate regions. It grows 5 to 20 feet tall. 5 to 20 feet tall. It's got a base on it that's like this size. I had one growing out of my foundation when I bought a house in Nebraska. It was growing out of my foundation. It had busted through my cement blocks. I had to have the cement blocks replaced because of this damn marijuana plant. I'm just pissed. What do you do with a plant that's this big? I mean, literally it was this big. How in the world do you get rid of it? You can't. It's a plant, okay? So what are you going to do with it? I had to chop it down with an axe. That's how I had to get rid of the damn thing. I was so pissed. And I had to replace the concrete block. Plant grows from 1 to 5 pounds of buds and smokable leaves. So what's the legal number? You can have, in Colorado, I think you can have 5 plants per person. So that's potentially 25 pounds of weed if it's a really good plant. Cannabis Indica grows in Southeast Asia. It's a shorter, bushier plant and is generally stronger smelling. It is usually grown to produce hashish because it has a lot of resin to it. So Cannabis Indica is can be used as a psychoactive substances, just like Cannabis Sativa. Cannabis ruderalis is a thin, small plant that has very little THC, and of course you certainly wouldn't grow it for production. Most marijuana is grown using the Sinsemilla growing system, where male and female plants are separated before pollination can occur. By removing the plants before pollination can take place, the plants produce no seeds and the THC is stronger. This method is used with both the Cannabis Sativa and the Cannabis Indica plants, and of course, that's how they get so much bud. Dried marijuana leaves, buds, and flowers are crushed and rolled into cigarettes known as joints. Marijuana can be smoked in pipes. Where was I? They were talking about hookah pipes. It can be smoked in hookah pipes. Hookah pipes are water pipes. Where was I? Oh, I was in Albuquerque. Driving through Albuquerque. They were talking about a store that sold hookah pipes. In India, marijuana is divided into 3 different strengths depending on the part of the plant that's smoked. Bhang has the lowest potency and uses the stems and leaves. Ganja is stronger and is from the stronger leaves and flowering tops. Charas is the concentrated resin and is the most potent, of course. So if somebody offers you charas or ganja, then probably you're okay. If they offer you bhang, then it's not going to be very strong. Depending on the region of the country, only 10 to 50% of the marijuana consumed in the United States is homegrown. Most of the marijuana being smoked is smuggled from Mexico and is either grown in Mexico or Colombia. In the United States, inventive growers have gone to more and more creative ways of producing their product, from growing fields of the plant in the wilderness-backed areas of national forests to growing plants in grow houses using grow lights and hydroponics. How many states are there that have legalized marijuana? 10. Sorry, it wasn't my wife. If it was my wife, I would have answered. I would have, Johnny. I talked to my wife. I'll talk to her. The typical marijuana plant contains over 420 chemicals. 30 of them have been found to be psychoactive. The most potent chemical, of course, is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. When ingested, the psychoactive chemicals in the marijuana are converted by the liver into 60 other metabolites, some of which are psychoactive as well. So you not only get 30 different drugs that are potentially hallucinogenic, but they are converted to 60 different metabolites by your liver, and now, of course, you've got a better buzz than you had before. Only about 20% of the THC in the joint is retained by the body, but the longer the smoke is held in the lungs, the more THC that is absorbed and the stronger the high. Modern marijuana contains as much as 4 to 25% THC as compared to the 60s where it averaged about 1 to 3%. So the marijuana that your grandparents were smoking back in the 1960s, of course, that marijuana wasn't very strong at all. The marijuana that people are smoking today can be as much as 25 times stronger than it was back in the 1960s. So the marijuana of today is not the marijuana of the past. So those old hippies that are voting to legalize marijuana that haven't smoked any pot since the 60s, they don't have a clue what they're legalizing. They have no idea. Most of the research from the past is based on the weaker marijuana, of course, and for this reason, we need new research in order to understand what we are actually loosing on the United States. Much to the researchers' surprise, marijuana has its own receptors in the brain. And of course, when we discovered this back in the 1990s, the pot smoking community said, dude, this is natural stuff, and that's one of the reasons why we have receptor sites. And of course, we didn't have a clue what these receptor sites were for. We didn't know. We hadn't done the research yet, or we had just discovered them. So of course, the marijuana smoking community is claiming that humans have been smoking marijuana for like ever, man. And of course, that's why we have these receptor sites in our brains. But then, of course, we discovered what the receptor sites were for. And because they were endogenous cannabinoid receptor sites, we called them cannabinoid receptor sites, because that's the only thing that we had discovered that actually filled these receptor sites. The first endogenous neurotransmitter that was found to occupy the cannabinoid receptors was anandamide. Anandamide is a neurotransmitter that tells you when you're satiated. It tells you when you're not hungry anymore. That's the purpose of anandamide. So if you fill that receptor site with anandamide, it will tell you to stop eating, stupid. That's what it does. But when it's filled with cannabinoids, with marijuana, with THC, when that fulfills that receptor site, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't tell you that you're not hungry anymore. As a matter of fact, it tells you the very opposite. So all of a sudden, if you smoke marijuana, this is one of the reasons why people get the munchies. They actually get hungry after they've smoked marijuana. That receptor site, when it's taken up by anandamide, tells you that you're not hungry anymore, that you're fine, that you don't need to eat. But when you smoke marijuana, because it is an incomplete receptor for that receptor site, you get the opposite reaction. And the reaction you get is the munchies. CB1 receptors are found mostly in the brain. It's found in the hippocampus, the amygdala, the basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. And because it's in the nucleus accumbens, is the basal ganglia. Because it is the amygdala, if you smoke marijuana, one of the things that happens if you smoke marijuana is that it makes you mellow. Why does it make you mellow? Because it's occupying receptor sites in your amygdala. It also makes you stupid, because you can't remember anything. Because that's what your hippocampus is for. It allows you to remember things. It also messes up the way that you move, because it's in the cerebellum. You have receptor sites in the cerebellum. So whereas you can walk across the street, as long as you haven't been smoking pot, if you've been smoking pot, it's not quite, you don't move quite as well. You don't drive the car very well. The problem is we don't know how much marijuana it takes to really mess you up. CB2 receptors are found mostly in the immune system in the lower body. And for that reason, of course, you've got CB1 receptors in your brain, you've got CB2 receptors in your immune system and in your lower body. If you smoke too much pot, guess what happens to your immune system? It screws it up. CB1 receptors are in areas that integrate sensory experiences with emotions. It controls learning, it controls memory, it controls a sense of novelty. And I don't know if you've ever been around somebody that's been smoking pot, but they find everything fascinating. Dude, have you seen the back of my hand? Man, it's like bitching. The veins. Look at my hand. Oh man, look at the pores in my skin. Oh, it's so fascinating. So guess what happens when you're not stoned? When you're stoned, everything is interesting. Your curiosity is aroused by anything. So guess what happens when you're not stoned anymore? Everything bores you. Everything bores you. That video game that you just played all night long, and it was so fascinating while you were stoned, you stopped smoking, and all of a sudden that's the most boring game in the world. I hate that game. I can't stand it. Not only that, you can't find anything that makes you feel good. Everything bores you because you're not smoking pot. Is this what we're doing to our kids? How old do you have to be able to smoke pot? What's the legal age of smoking marijuana? Find out. This is interesting. If I was in Colorado, how old would I have to be to legally smoke marijuana? This is important. Who can smoke marijuana legally? Of course, it's legal in Washington, it's legal in Oregon, it's legal in California. It's legal in Alaska. Legal smoking age. Because you don't have to smoke it. They put it in candy. You can buy gummy bears that are infused with THC. 21? So if I'm 18, I have to wait? Do I? I can get my 21-year-old sister pot. That'll work. Of course, I'm only 8. I don't even have to smoke it. I can just eat the candy. I can get the same THC. Well, what's that doing to my brain? The whole world is going to be boring from now on, as sad as that is, unless I'm stoned. Opioids and cocaine overdoses are dangerous because they suppress the heart rate and respiratory functions of the brainstem. At the same time, it is almost impossible to overdose with marijuana because the anandamide receptors that it utilizes merely increase or decrease our minds to sensory inputs. So there's nothing you can do. There's no way you can overdose on marijuana. You can smoke marijuana from now until the cows come home continuously, and it's going to make you stupid, but it's not going to kill you. Marijuana is a vasodilator, and so it causes bloodshot eyes when it is used. And so you can tell when somebody's been smoking pot because their eyes are bloodshot, which is always interesting. It often leads to conjunctivitis. It also causes physical relaxation or sedation. It has some control of pain. It does control pain. Coughing from lung irritation if you're smoking the pot. An increase in appetite because, of course, it's taking that, it's occupying that anandamide receptor site. Small to moderate loss of muscle coordination. Of course, it's not that bad, but then again, you're not walking very well, and you certainly can't drive very well. It increases your heart rate, it decreases your blood pressure, it decreases eye pressure, it decreases nausea, it decreases the ability to track movement, it creates an afterimage of a moving object. So you certainly wouldn't want to drive if you were stoned. Don't drive. It messes up your muscle coordination. Not really severely. It's not like being completely inebriated, but the problem is you don't see things very well. I mean, it looks like if somebody passes you, it looks like they're a semi, even if it's a motorcycle, because that motorcycle just keeps going, and it has this afterimage, so you keep seeing, how can you drive if you're stoned? But people do it, and they have accidents. Marijuana causes a small temporary disruption of the male hormone testosterone. Well, this is little importance to most males. For those with a hormone imbalance or those going through puberty, it can cause some problems. Are you ready for this? So let's say that you're 12 and you decide to smoke pot, and you're a guy, and you start smoking pot. Well, it causes a disruption of your testosterone. So you're a 12-year-old and you're a 13-year-old, you've been smoking pot. There's some really interesting things that happen to you. It causes fatty lipomas to build behind your nipples, which is okay if you're a female because, that's breast tissue, and that's okay. But if you're a guy, it gives you puffy nipples, as odd as that may seem. So if you watch movies from the 1970s and the guy takes off his shirt, a lot of times what you see is the fact that this guy's been smoking pot. And you know he's been smoking pot because he's got fatty lipomas behind his nipples. As funny as that may happen to be. So if you ever see somebody with nipples that look funny, it may be, not female, of course, we're not talking about females, we're talking about males here. It may be that they smoked pot when they were younger, and it has given them fatty lipomas behind their nipples. But it also disrupts your testosterone. So what's going to happen to this kid when he's 18 and 19 years old? He's been smoking pot all of his life. His testosterone has been erratic. So what's going to happen now? It would be interesting if somebody wrote a paper about testosterone and marijuana. It would be fascinating to see what type of what they have discovered about testosterone. We may be changing our gender by allowing people to smoke marijuana. This is really kind of fascinating. So we may be creating a new gender. Well, okay. The testosterone decrease can also cause a lowered sperm count and sperm motility in chronic pot users, making it less likely that they will be able to reproduce. So we've got this lowered testosterone level, and of course it's not lowered so much that the guy starts growing, well, he does start growing breasts, but that's not important. It doesn't make him a non-male, it just makes him less of a male. It also lowers his sperm count, and it really changes his sperm motility. So what's going to happen in the future? Let's pretend that everybody starts smoking pot as teenagers. What's going to happen to their ability to produce young, to produce children? Is it going to lower the possibility that they are able to reproduce? Yes, of course it is. And this is something that we've noticed since after World War II. As odd as that may seem, one of the things that we have noticed is that sperm counts are going down. They've been cut in half since World War II. Now that may not be very important. You can still reproduce with 150 million per mil, 150 million sperm per mil. In the old days it was 300 million was normal. Anything between 200 and 300 million was normal. Now normal is between 50 and 150 million. Because we're not seeing men with 250 million sperm per mil. In the old days we did. We saw it all the time. But now we're not. And it may have something to do with marijuana. We're also seeing more abnormal forms. Sperm are not all created equal. They're not all just as likely to have to be able to reproduce, to be able to impregnate the egg. One of the things we're seeing is more and more abnormal forms. In the old days, we saw between 10 and 20% abnormal forms. Now we're seeing up to 30%, and that's considered normal. If a guy had come into my laboratory and gave me a sperm specimen back in 1975, and he had 30% abnormal forms, and he had 100 million per mil sperm, we would have said that he was impotent, that he couldn't reproduce. He had we would say he had a low sperm count. And we'd tell him to do things like, well, if you want to reproduce, you need to start wearing boxer shorts. Stop wearing tighty whities. We actually told people that. Which sounds silly. But that's normal now. It's normal to see men with 30% abnormal forms. It's normal to see them have a sperm count below 100 million per mil. And marijuana may have something to do with it. Now if you're counseling somebody about being able to reproduce, and they haven't been able to impregnate their significant other, one of the things we're telling them to do is stop smoking pot. The other thing we're telling them to do is stop smoking cigarettes if they smoke cigarettes. And the other thing is to wear boxer shorts instead of tighty whities. That's important. There's nothing you can do to increase your sperm count. It's not like you can drink Gatorade and increase your sperm count. Drink lemonade. It works every time. Marijuana makes people hungry. It's called the munchies. When THC occupies the CB1 receptors in the hypothalamus, that indicates satiation. Marijuana doesn't sharpen an individual's sense of taste. As a matter of fact, it may deaden it. People who smoke cigarettes, of course, they can't taste as well. Because they destroy some of their taste buds. Well, marijuana does exactly the same thing. So it makes you less likely to be able to like something, or it makes you less likely to dislike something. Marijuana also gives the individual a feeling of confusion about where they are, and eventually makes them feel deja vu, along with drowsy, aloof, and difficulty concentrating. We see a lot of deja vu with these individuals. And sometimes that's why they go into the emergency room. They're having like a deja vu thing, man. It's like I've been here before. You have been here before. You were here last week. Oh, yeah, now I remember. Okay. They can't remember from 1 minute to the next, and that's the reason that they're having deja vu. With the advent of marijuana high in THC, these varieties have been have more extreme effects. Giddiness, it makes you giddier. Increased alertness to the point of hypervigilance. Major distortions of time. Major distortions of color. Major distortions of sound. Sensation of movement under the user's feet. So they shuffle their feet because they feel like the earth is moving. I can feel the earth moving, man. It's so spooky. Visual illusions, hallucinations, paranoia, depersonalization. Saw a lot of paranoia, and that's one of the major effects. I think I told you the story of I was called out one night, or one day. It was actually in the middle of the afternoon on a Sunday. So I threw my kids in the car and I headed over to the base hospital. The x-ray tech was called out at the same time I was called out, and he got in front of me, and the guy was going like 5 miles an hour and driving me nuts. It took us forever to get in there. Of course, they screamed at me as soon as I got in there. Where the hell were you? You're supposed to be 5 minutes away, and here it's taking you 15 minutes to get here, the whole thing. And of course, I'm behind the x-ray tech. So I go down to the x-ray and say, dude, this is a friend of mine. And I asked him, man, were you stoned or something? And I looked him in the eyes, and his eyes were bloodshot. And I knew, whoops, I said the wrong thing. Of course, he couldn't hit me at that point. It was after he stopped being stoned that he was more likely to hit me. But what he did was, this causes all kinds of interesting problems. Paranoia is one of them. And so he put out a hit on me. He hired a guy to kill me. Of course, he was our quarterback on our football team, and I was one of the ends. And he was like, he weighed 50 more pounds than I did. He could have ripped me into little bitty pieces. But of course, he hires a man to kill me. So because he was afraid I was going to turn him in. Because I had mentioned the fact that he was stoned, and he was driving 5 miles an hour. It drove me crazy. I could have gotten out and run to the hospital and gotten there before I got there in the car. Of course, I had the kids at the time, so I couldn't do that. Anyway, so he got paranoid and put out a hit on me. Eventually, he called it off. But for about 2 weeks there, it was kind of touch and go. There were people coming in trying to get on base with weapons to wipe me out. I don't know how much money he put out on me. I'm not sure how much I was worth, but I didn't get killed. I didn't turn him in, and everything turned out okay. And we never talked about marijuana again. And the next year, it was football season. I played, but he didn't. He didn't play. He was also a basketball player. He was a really good basketball player. Marijuana users tend to act more emphatic to others' feelings when under the influence of the drug. Marijuana also makes the user more suggestible. The main organ in the brain that is affected by marijuana is the amygdala, which regulates your appetite, pain, anxiety, and fear, suppression of pain memories, and the sense of novelty. And of course, the sense of novelty is really kind of interesting. While you're stoned, of course, everything is interesting, and when you're not stoned, nothing is interesting. So it kind of messes up relationships. It can mess up relationships. They're madly in love with you while they're stoned. Then when they're not stoned, they treat you like a piece of garbage. They're also afraid that you're going to turn them in. I mean, the paranoia is really kind of interesting. When an individual uses marijuana, the THC artificially stimulates the amygdala, making even the most mundane objects and ideas interesting. If the individual overstimulates the CB1 receptors, these cells will downregulate, sometimes reducing their receptors by 70%. So of course you smoke marijuana and the high you get today is not going to be the high that you get tomorrow. When the individual isn't stoned, this reduction of CB1 receptors will result in the loss of novelty. Even the most novel stimuli will be boring to them. This was a complaint that I got from a friend, one of my students at Ashford. She's from Chicago and she had a lot of friends that smoked pot. And she said that as long as they were stoned, they were a lot of fun. But when they weren't stoned, man, they were downers. They were grouchy. Nothing made them happy. They couldn't play video games anymore because the video games were so boring. And of course, you know, they're playing like Pong on television when they're stoned, and everything is just hilarious. But when they're not stoned, nothing's funny. They have lost the ability to be happy. Everything bores them. For a marijuana smoker to continue working, studying, or even maintaining a relationship when not stoned takes a great deal of desire. Thus, the individual will be more likely to continue to use to combat the perpetual boredom they experience when they aren't stoned. And of course, if you've ever been around somebody that is a chronic marijuana user, nobody wants to be around them when they're not stoned. They may be the life of the party when they are stoned, but the rest of the time they're Debbie Downer, as it were. Receptor recovery can take from 2 weeks for moderate smokers up to 6 weeks for longer, or longer for heavy smokers. So we get this downregulation taking place, and it's going to take a number of weeks before that they will be able to recover those receptor sites. Short-term memory is held in the hippocampus for immediate use. If this information is needed, it will be held until it can be transferred to the long-term memory. Anandamide receptors in the hippocampus dictate how much memory is available for immediate use. Because THC occupies anandamide receptor sites, it limits the amount of hippocampal short-term memory. These people can't remember from 1 second to the next, from 1 minute to the next. It's really irritating. The user may lose significant chunks of their lives while using because of memory impairment caused by the THC. Marijuana slows learning and disrupts short-term memory, but it doesn't affect long-term memory, though it does disrupt memory in general, attention span, and cognitive functioning. Now, what if this individual their brain is still developing? What if they're smoking pot before the age of 12? What's that going to do to their brain? Well, they did studies in New Zealand. They've had legalized marijuana in New Zealand for 25 years, for over 25 years. And they did studies over a 25-year period. And what they discovered was that the IQ that these individuals had before they started smoking marijuana was 10 to 20 points higher than it was after they smoked marijuana. Now, it was more prevalent in individuals that started smoking before the age of 12. So since the legal age is 21 to buy marijuana, we don't have to worry about it, right? 18-year-olds aren't going to smoke pot. The junior high kids aren't going to smoke pot because it's illegal for them to do it, and they will only do what's legal for them to do, right? I'm not making it illegal. Am I being too positive about this? Probably. Can we keep kids from drinking? It's illegal to drink under the age of 21. It's a legal drinking age in Arizona. High school kids never get drunk, do they? Think back to when you were in high school. What percentage would you say? These are all your friends. How many of them drank alcohol? Did you have any friends that didn't drink alcohol? Oh. Was it a large percentage?
Usually half of them.
Half of them? It's only half. That's not so bad.
Yeah, I never have any friends in high school. So.
There you go. Okay. And I didn't have any friends in high school, so I can't talk about this. I'm not exactly sure how many people were. But so can we keep them from smoking pot? No. Hell no. I'm not just no, but hell no. for us to think that we can keep kids from getting a hold of edibles, especially if we're putting it on gummy bears. My goodness, everybody eats gummy bears except me. I don't like the texture. Ugh. Ugh. It's, I don't know, it's like snot. Isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Ugh. What am I talking about? Short-term memory? Okay. Because THC occupies anandamide receptor sites, it limits the amount of hippocampal short-term memory. The user may lose significant chunks of their lives. Marijuana slows down learning and disrupts short-term memory, but doesn't affect long-term memory, though it does disrupt your memory and generally your attention span and cognitive functioning. Oddly, users may feel that they are thinking deeper. They really irritating because they think, man, I've got the answer to all of our problems, and then they'll tell you what the answer is, and you're going, what? That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? When the brain is developing, there is an explosion of the connections and synapses among the nerve cells in the frontal lobes around age 12. A great deal of pruning of these connections and synapses will take place through the next 10 to 12 years, depending on the use. The unused connections will be broken and discarded. This is the way the brain corrects itself. You don't have any unused parts of your brain. Whoever said that we only use about 10% of our brain was wrong. We use 100% of our brain. Sorry. Which is a good thing, because we need to use 100% of our brains. We use it for different things, and that's good. And if we don't need a part, if we have a brain cell that we don't need, we get rid of it. Because we don't want to have to feed that damn thing. You don't want to have to feed something that isn't functional. That's why horses piss me off. We own 2 horses in Montana. What did they do? Nothing. They ate. And they defecated, and I had to clean it up. And we had to feed them every morning and every evening. We had to buy hay for them in the wintertime. Well, what did they do? What did we get out of those damn horses? I didn't even like the horses, okay? My wife liked to see them grazing on the side of the hill. That's the reason we had horses. So she could see them, and she got the aesthetic pleasure of watching my horses. And I hope my wife doesn't watch this. She's going to kill me. But I hated those damn horses. Not hate, that's too strong a word. One of them kicked me, it almost broke my arm, it kicked me in the kidney, I thought my kidney it blew out my kidney. It bit me on the arm, because they didn't feed it fast enough. Yeah, of course. She rode one of the horses twice, period, and we had them for 5 years. Or did we have them for 7 years? Oh my God. We fed them every year. Anyway, not important. Why am I talking about this? Useless things. Okay, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about useless things. So when we get rid of useless things, except horses, of course, because we just keep the damn things for no reason whatsoever. Heavy marijuana usage during this time frame will change the brain structure. Because of the distorting effects of marijuana, the individual may develop an impaired ability to determine danger, to organize, and to prioritize. Marijuana and MDMA use is especially destructive for memory. And of course, this is one of the reasons that we suggest you don't use marijuana. Marijuana tends to give their users a distorted sense of time, and this is known as temporal disintegration. That's what happened with my friend that was driving in front of me. He thought he was driving the speed limit. He thought he's getting there fast, really fast. But of course, since he had been smoking pot, his sense of movement, his sense of time was completely distorted. And he was driving 5 miles an hour. Try to drive 5 miles an hour in a car sometime, okay? The thing wants to stall out. It really does. Even an automatic will try to stall out. If you
My grandfather tried getting me to drive at that rate. But no.
It doesn't work. You can't drive that slow.
It's not normal.
It isn't normal, it doesn't feel right. I can walk faster than that, let alone run faster than that. Okay, so you have temporal disintegration. This effect may help with dull, repetitive jobs. For more complex jobs, of course, like studying, the individual may become easily bored and quit. And of course, that's one of the problems with people that smoke pot. They quit a lot. Why do they quit? Because if they're not stoned, everything's boring for them. So they quit. Temporal disintegration is part of the most debilitating aspects of using marijuana, along with impaired judgment and short-term memory loss. Multiple and interactive tasks can be impossible for these individuals. Distortion of time, impaired judgment, and short-term memory loss will be evident in individuals' behavior for up to 7 days after use. So despite the fact you're not stoned anymore, all of these aspects of your mind will be distorted for 7 days. So you're not going to be normal for 7 days. The problem is you don't know it. You can't remember it. You can't remember when you screwed up. You can't remember anything. It's not like you have amnesia. It's like it's not important to you. And of course it just, oh dude, I forgot all about that. Yeah, sorry, I was supposed to take you to the doctor. Sorry, dude. By 28 days, the individual has returned to what passes for normal for this select individual. So you have to stop smoking pot in order to recover. Research into the effects of smoking marijuana on the respiratory system indicates that smoking 4 or 5 joints is as destructive on the mucous membranes and the lungs as smoking a pack of cigarettes. But of course, you don't usually smoke that much. You don't usually smoke 4 or 5 joints at a time or a day. You want to be that stoned? Maybe, I don't know. This is because marijuana isn't regulated as to its growth and refinement and is rarely filtered. Chronic use of marijuana, of course, that's what the hookah pipe is all about. It's a water pipe, and it's theoretically it filters it, so it makes it less harsh. Chronic use of marijuana can lead to chronic coughing and bronchitis. The most damage is done to those individuals who smoke both marijuana and cigarettes, of course. So they get the tars and nicotine from the cigarettes, and they also get all the debilitating effects of the marijuana. Marijuana smokers have increased mucus secreting epithelial cells, but decreased cilia to expel the excess mucus. For those who smoke both cigarettes and joints, they lose all the cilia on the mucous membranes, meaning that they will have to cough to expel the mucus. And this is the reason, if you've ever been around somebody who is a chronic smoker, who smokes a lot of cigarettes, when they get up in the morning, the first thing they do is they hack, they cough. And when the mucus comes out, it's black, which is very tasty. It smells like old cigarettes. It smells like somebody urinated down your throat and you're coughing up the urine and the tobacco and the tars and nicotine. That's what it smells like. Which is always fun. Working in the hospital, I got to smell this a lot because people would cough in the morning. Of course, my job was to wake them up and draw their blood. So what happens, as you're drawing their blood, they start coughing, and of course they're coughing in your face. Don't worry, I'm not going to get sick from this stuff unless I vomit, but it smells like tobacco mixed with urine. It's quite a wonderful smell. I'd never eat breakfast after I'd been drawing blood because these guys have been coughing in my face. My stomach was churning, as you can imagine. I never threw up. I was a professional, don't worry. While researchers have found that there is no link between marijuana and lung cancer, they've also discovered that marijuana suppresses the anti-tumor immune response, leading to a greater probability of developing tumors, including breast tumors. So it can cause cancers. It can lead to cancers. It can lead to tumors. Marijuana has also been found to increase replication of HIV, accelerating its progress. Because of its capacity to suppress the immune system, users tend to be more susceptible to colds, flus, and other viral infections. The immunocompromised are not advised to use marijuana because it does cause more compromising of your immune system. Marijuana routinely increases select mental problems. Paranoia is one of the biggies. My friend, who had been my friend up until the time that I accused him of smoking marijuana, was willing to kill me in order to protect himself. Now, he knew I had 2 kids, and he knew I didn't have a wife. So what did he think was going to happen next? Well, he's a marijuana smoker. He doesn't think that far ahead. It also increases anxiety and depression. If a person is on the edge, the confusion and depersonalization of THC will very often tip the scales in a negative direction. Individuals who maintain a paranoid mindset while smoking marijuana might have exacerbated reactions with stronger blends or with other drug mixtures. So this can be a problem as well. Tolerance to marijuana occurs very rapidly. Often new smokers will experience inverse tolerance where they actually become more sensitive to the marijuana and have heightened sensations with less smoking. Marijuana's effects last from 4 to 6 hours, but the substance may be detectable for up to 28 days and actually will stay in the body for up to 3 months. But it's not detectable anymore. So how long will you have a positive urine? Well, about 28 days. Because of the length of time it takes to rid the body of the substance, withdrawal from marijuana doesn't start until a longer period after abstinence. Research has disclosed that despite the rumor to the contrary, marijuana smokers do go through withdrawals. Although they are more delayed than any other drug, and like other drugs, not everyone will go through all the withdrawal symptoms. Everyone will have craving. Other symptoms include anger, irritability, anxiety, and or aggression. Remember, when these people aren't smoking, everything's boring. And they all of these things, the reasons that they're smoking marijuana become exacerbated. All of these negative things, the anxiety or the depression that they were trying to fight against, all of a sudden it becomes more acute. They will have aches and pains and chills if they were smoking marijuana because of select pains. All of a sudden those pains will get worse. Potentially what happens, and this is one of the problems with taking a painkiller. Let's say that I've hurt my shoulder, and so I take a bunch of ibuprofen and go over and lift weights. Well, what's the probability I'm going to lift something and damage that shoulder? I'm not going to feel it, so I'm not going to know. So I should never, ever take a painkiller before I do something, because I might injure myself irreparably. But these guys, of course, they're smoking marijuana, not thinking about it. They're doing things, so their pain is may potentially be more acute once they stop smoking pot. They may be depressed. They may have the inability to concentrate. They may have slight tremors, sleep disturbances, decreased appetite, and stomach pains. And of course, they will start sweating. And it stinks. Unlike most other drugs, marijuana has stronger psychological addiction than physical addiction. Marijuana has just as strong chronic and compulsive use as any other drug, so people who smoke marijuana swear by that stuff. Thank you. Unfortunately, marijuana's reputation is that it is non-addicting and leading people into illegal usage and destructive circumstances with the idea that because it is less addictive, the behavior is all right. One of the arguments that I have read on the internet is that it's natural, dude. So this is a natural substance, and natural substances aren't addictive. Yes, they are. Cocaine comes from a plant. Is it addictive? Of course it's addictive. It's one of the most addictive substances known to man. Tobacco is a natural substance, and now we know that nicotine is the most addictive substance known to man. So just because it's natural doesn't mean jack squat. I almost said something else. Doesn't mean a thing. Okay, adolescents are very sensitive to peer pressure. People who smoke marijuana tend to hang around other people who smoke marijuana. I don't know if you noticed this, but all the stoners at your high school would hang around one another. And maybe they made connections, and that's where they got their marijuana. Because this crowd has a more rebellious nature than, say, the chess club, though chess clubs can have a rebellious nature, drugs tended to be around for the cool people to try. In this way, tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana are gateway drugs to heavier drug use. Doesn't mean that you have to. Doesn't mean that everybody will. I had a colleague when I was at Fort Belknap, and he was a marijuana smoker, and he wanted it legalized. He would have done anything to get it legalized. And he claimed, every time I mentioned that it was a gateway drug, he just about hit the roof. And we would have this very interesting argument. Of course, he had a very difficult time maintaining the argument because he was a marijuana smoker, so he couldn't remember from yesterday to today. So it was really kind of an interesting argument. And of course, he wasn't stoned when he was at school, so he was having one of his, I don't know, dry drunks or something. He'd always get angry. He'd be so angry he wanted this stuff legalized right now. So is it a gateway drug? Of course it's a gateway drug. It allows people to maintain the rebellious nature until they can move on to something else, something stronger. People who develop a pattern of use at an early age restructure brain cells toward continued addictive use. Tolerance of less serious drugs may lead to a desire to refine that high. Researchers have found that almost everyone in treatment programs have started with the big three. Marijuana use by 17 gives a 2.7 to 5.2 greater chance of heavier use. So if you start by the time you finish high school, the probability that you'll go to something else stronger is 2.7 to 5.2 times greater than somebody who didn't start smoking marijuana in high school. $11.50, right? Well, it's almost 11. Well, it is 11:50 right this second. So why don't we stop right here? I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound like I'm preaching, but I am. I'm preaching.